Talk a little. Okay. Test 1, 2. Test 1, 2. Test 1, 2.
In this room, we will take part in a ceremony across the street when the last beam is placed in the new Liberty Tower. In the audience, we have members of the Board of Directors of the Liberty National Bank and Trust Company. Would all these directors and their wives please stand so that they may be recognized? And now I would like to present our head table guests whom you will not be meeting as part of the program. Would you please stand as I introduce you, and let's recognize them individually. Mr. Wayman Humphrey of Tulsa, President of the Oklahoma State Chamber of Commerce. Mr. Len Maraldi, Acting Director of the Federal Aviation Administration Aeronautical Center. Mr. H.L. Longcrier, Jr., Vice President of the Henry C. Beck Company, contractor on the new Liberty Tower. Mr. Orville Summey, representing the Thomas E. Stanley Company, architects and engineers for the new Liberty Tower. And Mr. Joseph B. Wilford, Vice President and Regional Officer, Real Estate and Mortgage Loan Department of the New York Life Insurance Company, the Chicago office. And now, before I ask for introductions from the audience, the individual members, I would like to introduce one myself that is out in the audience, former Governor Raymond Gary. Glad to have you with us, Governor. Now, do we have any introductions from the audience, individual introductions, or new chamber members? Yes, sir. That's it. Yes, sir. I would like to call on Mr. Phil Rhodes, a trustee of the Oklahoma City Airport Trust and chairman of the Chamber's Aviation Council. Mr. Rhodes.
Thank you, Mr. Parsons. Governor, other distinguished guests, it's always fine to make an announcement here because someone in the chamber writes it for you, so I'll read it. The Oklahoma City Airport Trust and the Aviation Council of the Oklahoma City Chamber of Commerce is pleased to announce approval of a new $6 3/10 million building at the Federal Aviation Administration Aeronautical Center in Oklahoma City. Here's a picture rendering of it to your left over here on the easel. We hope to complete this building in the fall of 1972. A working group composed of myself, City Manager Robert Olam, Aeronautical Center Director A.L. Coulter, Acting Director of the Aeronautical Center Len Maraldi, Acting Executive Officer for the Aeronautical Center Georgia Anderson, and others will guide the building through all stages from planning to completion of construction. In addition, the Chamber's Aviation Council will fully back this effort. This is a building that's been announced by the last 6 or 8 months, but never was officially. So you may have heard about it from time to time. Reporters call me, and I said, well, I don't know anything about it. The new building will consist of 3 stories, as you can see, and a full basement, totaling approximately or in excess of 200,000 square feet, and will be located on the west side of MacArthur Boulevard at the Aeronautical Center between the Civil Aeronautical Institute building and the Aviation Records building. The building, when occupied, will house the U.S. Coast Guard Institute, based at the Aeronautical Center, the National Aircraft Accident Investigation School, the computer services for the FAA Center, and certain administrative offices, such as the print shop, distribution, and procurement. Something over 600 personnel will occupy the new building. As I understand it, this computer area is all new equipment in addition to what they now have at the center. It is expected that actual construction probably can start in the spring of 1971, or early spring, February or March. The last airport trust building erected at the Aeronautical Center was the $2.9 million systems training building, completed in the fall of 1969 and dedicated by the Secretary of Transportation, John A. Volpe. Whether just to remark, since the origination of the Oklahoma City Airport Trust in 1956, and we have constructed approximately $35 million worth of buildings at the Aeronautical Center, all leased to the federal government on a full amortization payout basis, including some ground rental and other side expense money. It's a very pleasure to be here and to make this announcement.
Thank you, Phil, and it's a very welcome announcement. I have looked forward to this next part of our program personally because it gives the Chamber an opportunity to publicly recognize the firms and organizations who have played a major part in the redevelopment of the first part, Section 1A of the Central Business District. We are all rightfully proud of the huge amount of construction taking place in downtown Oklahoma City today. But in the early 60s, this area had slowly deteriorated in a pattern similar to many other metropolitan areas. Many businesses were moving out. It was at this stage that drastic open-heart surgery was called for by the Oklahoma City Chamber, and this immediately became the Chamber's #1 goal. Through cooperation of our city officials and our businessmen, a long-range plan was developed. An urban renewal authority was set up, and the way was prepared for a new run. But to bring these plans into reality, construction commitments were needed from firms and organizations and from the people of Oklahoma City. This involved millions of dollars, and maybe even more important, a strong faith in the future of this city and of the state of Oklahoma. This faith was affirmed when a small group of firms and organizations started announcing construction plans. The citizens passed a bond issue to provide the initial funds for our future convention center. The areas began to be cleared by the Oklahoma City Urban Renewal Authority, and the City Council kept its sights high and its goals high. Today, each of these projects is in some stage of construction. Recognizing the significance of these commitments, which affect in a very concrete way our future, the outlook of our people, and the faith backed by deeds, the Oklahoma City Chamber of Commerce has set up an exclusive award to publicly express its appreciation to those who have made and in the future will make major contributions. 9 will receive the first awards today for their part in Project 1A. We have prepared a special plaque which we hope our honorees will display with justifiable pride. I would like to read the first one of these and then call each honoree forward to receive his recognition. The Oklahoma City Central Business District Certificate of Recognition presented to the this particular one, Alum M. Street Memorial Myriad, for one of the magnificent manifestations made to Oklahoma City's heart, which will benefit the central Oklahoma area and the entire state. Through major construction and the announcement of plans for construction in the Central Business District, a group of firms and organizations are responsible for the rebirth of this vital area and for the beginning of its complete redevelopment, a redevelopment even greater than the beginnings of Oklahoma City in 1889. The Oklahoma City Chamber of Commerce publicly recognizes and honors these firms and organizations and presents this special written expression of recognition in a special ceremony as evidence of its appreciation. Presented on the 23rd day of July, 1970, before a General Board of Directors meeting of the Oklahoma City Chamber of Commerce. Signed, the Oklahoma City Chamber of Commerce, by myself as president, by Earl Sneed, chairman of the Urban Redevelopment Council, and by Paul Strasbaugh, executive vice president of the Chamber of Commerce. Will Mr. Bill Bishop, vice mayor of Oklahoma City, please stand up and accept this on behalf of the citizens of Oklahoma City.
John, if I may, I might say this is quite a unique acceptance, inasmuch as the very nucleus of the force that made this become a reality is sitting in this audience today. Had it not been for everyone collectively, of course, certainly this project would have never become a reality. But it's on behalf of the mayor and the city council, the entire citizens of Oklahoma City, and everyone present, certainly my pleasure to accept this award. Thank you.
Next, we recognize the H.T. Griffin Company, whose dramatic announcements in the 60s for the $17.4 million Liberty Tower and other downtown construction reflected their faith. Accepting the award, Mr. H.T. Tom Griffin. The first major construction project in Project 1A was the Mummers Theater, now nearing completion at a cost of $2 million. Accepting the award for the Mummers Group, Mr. Jack Derlin, president of Mummers Theater. Thank you,
I want to take just 2 minutes because I see a number of my associates here in this endeavor, and to say to you, ladies and gentlemen, that next September, shortly after Labor Day, Al Harmon, who has done such a magnificent job building this theater, will turn it over to our Board of Trustees. And at that time, John, we're going to have $3 million instead of $2 million invested in this theater, which has been raised locally here in the community and through the Ford Foundation. Now, because this money is difficult to get when you're seeking it for culture, This job has taken us nearly 8 years, and I want to accept this plaque, John, today on behalf of a very loyal Board of Trustees, and I want to pay particular tribute, and I see a number of these people here, the greatest executive committee that any president of any civic organization could ever hope to have. And that executive committee consists of Norman Morse and Frank Hightower and Harvey Everest and Stanley Draper and our president, John Parsons. It consists of Grady Harris and Howard Bozarth and Tom Utterback and Ralph Boland and Lo Runkle and Mike Henderson and Mark Meister. And I want to pay tribute to the untiring efforts of Max Ism and Gene Abney. And so on behalf of those people, those wonderful people who really didn't know that this job couldn't be done, I want to accept this plaque on behalf of them, and to say also that I hope that this theater, and perhaps Governor Bartlett can help us in this respect, I hope that this theater will not just be a theater for Oklahoma City. I hope it will be a theater for our entire state of Oklahoma. Thank you, John.
Through major remodeling programs, Kerr McGee has shown its faith in downtown Oklahoma City. Now under construction is the $20 million Kerr McGee Center with its 30-story office tower. Accepting the award, Mr. Dean A. McGee, Chairman of the Board of the Kerr McGee Corporation. Dean didn't argue with that $20 million figure like Jack did, so I guess that one was right. Or maybe he doesn't even want to talk about it now. A major key through the entire redevelopment has been and is the Oklahoma City Urban Renewal Authority, which has done a job that is the envy of many, many other metropolitan centers. Accepting the award is Mr. W.M. Bill Harrison, a member of the Oklahoma City Urban Renewal Authority Board of Commissioners.
Won't take but a second of your time, John, but I'd be remiss if I didn't, on behalf of the Urban Renewal, thank the citizens of Oklahoma City, and especially our mayor and the city council and the Oklahoma City Chamber of Commerce, and also these developers in the downtown Oklahoma City who are willing to spend their money to develop these buildings. Thank you.
A leader from Oklahoma City's beginning has been the First National Bank and Trust Company. They have two 14-story office buildings under construction. Accepting the award, Mr. Felix N. Porter, President of the First National Bank. Another bank which has repeatedly shown its faith by building is the Fidelity Bank, which now has an $8 million 14-story office building under construction. Accepting the award, Mr. Jack Kahn, Chairman of the Board of the Fidelity Bank. To provide heating and cooling for a number of downtown buildings, Thermal Systems Incorporated, a subsidiary of Oklahoma Natural Gas, has a $4.8 million facility under construction. Accepting the award is Mr. James Tyree, Vice President of Oklahoma Natural Gas Company. Jim? The Liberty National Bank and Trust Company will not only be the major tenant in the new Liberty Tower under construction across the street, but also has a new $1 million motor bank under construction. Accepting the award Mr. J.W. McLean, President of Liberty National Bank.
John, if I'd known you was going to go to all this trouble, we should have planned a topping out ceremony for the drive-in. I think we missed a big bet there. Could I ask my fellow officers and employees to please stand, on whose behalf I'm happy to accept this. We recognize the directors and their wives. Would the officers and employees please stand?
Ladies and gentlemen, these are the Chamber's first Central Business District Awards. We hope to make others to firms and organizations who will be making major announcements in the month ahead. I do have 3 brief announcements about upcoming events to call to your attention and invite your participation. Our August board meeting on Thursday, the 6th, will the importance of building and rebuilding Oklahoma's capital city. Governor Bartlett has been a leader in growth and development for the entire state for the past 4 years. The Chamber has been pleased to work with him on a number of industrial projects. Prior to becoming Chief Executive of our state, he served 2 terms in the Oklahoma Senate. His full energies have gone to further the state of Oklahoma. Ladies and gentlemen, the number 1 citizen and the number 1 salesman of our great state, the Honorable Dewey F. Bartlett.
Thank you very much. John, thank you very much. Mr. Bill McLean, President John Parsons, Vice Mayor Bill Bishop, members of the Board of Directors of the Oklahoma City Chamber of Commerce, my fellow Okies, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I appreciate very much this opportunity and the honor that you have given me by asking me to speak at this important time in the history of Oklahoma City. I'm very much aware of the valuable role that has been played by interested citizens, all the citizens of Oklahoma City, and particularly the business community in revitalizing downtown Oklahoma City. Sort of reminded of what a businessman is. That he's a man from the rural area who works real hard so he can make enough money to come to the city, or he can work harder so he can move back to the rural area. But many people have come here from all over the state and placed their roots deep in Oklahoma City and built Oklahoma City and the state and stayed in Oklahoma City. I'm honored, too, to be here because I hail from a town down the turnpike by the name of Tulsa. And I'm very much aware as I go about the state, see the efforts of the 2 metropolitan areas, how fortunate each city is, how fortunate Tulsa is and Oklahoma City is, to have one thing in common with each other, and that is 98 miles away is a very progressive and aggressive city that offers that very important ingredient called competition. And so I think that it is a very big asset to our state to have 2 cities that are progressively moving forward. The track record of Oklahoma City has always been an excellent one. It's been a winner from the very beginning. The earliest recorded description of the site of Oklahoma City was written by Washington Irving on October 25th, 1832. In his book, Tour on the Prairies, he wrote this: "We left the buffalo camp about 8 o'clock and had a tiresome and harassing march of 2 hours, over ridges of hills covered with a ragged, meager forest of scrub oaks and broken by deep gullies. About 10 o'clock, we came to where this line of rugged hills swept down into a valley through which flowed the North Fork of the Canadian River, a beautiful meadow about a half-mile wide, enameled with yellow autumnal flowers, stretched for 2 or 3 miles along the roof of the hills, bordered on the opposite side of the river, whose banks were fringed with cottonwood trees, the bright foliage of which refreshed and delighted the eye. All this after being wearied by the contemplation of monotonous wastes of brown forests. Washington Irving's party then forded the river just south of where we are today. Would you think it possible that Washington Irving could at that time have predicted the establishment of a city of nearly 500,000 people on this plot of ground that consisted, as he described it, of scrub oaks, deep gullies, ragged hills, and a river that you could walk across? The location certainly didn't have the usual characteristics of a frontier town. There was not a great deal of water for a safe water supply. There wasn't any military importance, particularly to the site. But yet, on April 22nd, 1889, as you well know, Oklahoma City became a city overnight of 10,000. And Oklahoma City has been running at a very rapid pace ever since. Things have certainly changed since that first night for a city in 1889. Oklahoma City is now a center for trade routes by land and air. It's in a state that is very quickly going to be a transportation hub of the United States with water, air, rail, and ground transportation that as a hub will fan out throughout the country. We have a great military complex in Tinker Air Force Base. We now have Oklahoma City, despite the fact that the North Canadian River can still be crossed on foot in spots, we now have an adequate water supply. We now have vision and plans for the future that even provide more in water and more virtually in every part of living. Oklahoma City has grown considerably in the last 81 years. This development has been a model picture of progress. As an example of the growth in our state's capital city, let's review just the past decade, the 60s. During that 10-year period, 86,500 job opportunities were created. 55,349 new housing units were constructed. It produced 919 miles of new paved streets, 85 miles of new expressway systems, $1.2 billion in new buildings, residential, commercial, and public. Will Rogers Airport saw a new terminal erected. There was a new central post office built. Baptist Hospital began operations. The National Cowboy Hall of Fame became a national drawing card for tourists traveling through our state. The new State Fair Arena was built. A new police headquarters now houses some of the finest police officers in the country. The Civic Center was remodeled. The OU Medical School announced plans to develop a $185 million medical complex that will be one of the finest such facilities in the nation. A massive urban renewal program began, which is changing the entire face of the downtown area. And in terms of dollars and cents, your own chamber estimates that $3.9 billion was invested in urban growth in Oklahoma City during the 60s. So it was indeed a decade of progress for Oklahoma's capital city during the 1960s. What does this mean? This means, of course, more jobs, more opportunities, more chances to do things. It means responsibilities on various levels of government, particularly your city and your county. And they have performed very ably and very well in the many areas that have required their attention. But as your city grows and prospers, it becomes stronger economically. It becomes better able, with proper planning, to look to the future. I noticed that John mentioned that soon some statistics will be announced about the growth in Oklahoma City, and so I will mention just a couple that I have, and they may be different anyway, John, to show the current situation. But the employment in Oklahoma City reached an all-time high in June of this year of 290,100, some 4,400 larger than June of 1969. The unemployment historically goes up rather sharply in the month of June when the students reach the labor market. So I'll use May on unemployment, and I really think it'll be a more accurate comparison of the true situation in Oklahoma City. But compared to a 5% unemployment rate nationally, at the present time, Oklahoma City in May of this year was 3.3. Very, very much lower than the national rate. The state, during that period, was at 4.2, considerably under the 5% national rate. So Oklahoma City has been leading the way in attracting jobs, in providing jobs, in attracting interest from companies throughout the country. I would say that Oklahoma City is the hottest city going, not from a temperature point of view, but from the point of view of attraction today to expanding companies. Companies interested in expanding their office forces or expanding their manufacturing facilities. And this has been borne out by the recent growth that has been occasioned and the growth that will take place in the very near future that's already very evident. Your city can look inward for leadership, as it always has, financial capital, and services that some smaller cities must find outside your local community. Your city has been progressive, and I'm reminded of the challenge that reached Oklahoma City at a time when your leaders realized there needed to be some change. There needed to be some redevelopment. And this was at the beginning of the last decade. As one resident told me one time, and I think perhaps he described it very accurately, he says the downtown area just sort of wore out all at once. But this presented, in addition to a problem, it presented some solutions to the problem. Because eyeing that problem, the Urban Action Foundation was formed with Stanley Draper Sr. as its president. And through the efforts of many people, all of you who are here primarily, and others, including Mr. McGee and Mr. E.K. Gaylord, Edward Gaylord, Harvey Evers, Stanton Young, and many others. Private donations were collected, and in July of '64, a contract was signed with the internationally famous architect I.M. Pei. You know, as I do, that this name is spelled P-E-I, and most of us would probably pronounce it pie. This plan was then called the Pie in the Sky Plan. There were doubters, just as there have been in Oklahoma before, as to whether the state could move forward, whether Oklahoma City could wrestle with this problem and come up with a workable solution. And could they do it soon enough? Well, the pie in the sky plan, the pay plan, is well along to completion. In December of '64, in the Persian room across the street, Mr. Pay dropped the wraps off his model of the new Oklahoma City. Project 1A of the Oklahoma City Urban Renewal Authority covered 528 acres of the downtown area. And that includes the 320 acres of the original town site of Oklahoma City, the site described in 1832 by Washington Irving. And how fitting it was for the occasion, because here were the roots of Oklahoma City, the downtown, the original site where a city was created 75 years before. And on this same site would be built a new downtown. As architect Pay said on that Persian room unveiling, and I'm quoting him, "When this is completed, you should have the most beautiful city in the United States." At a time in the development of the country when beauty, ecology, and environment are so important, and we all are realizing more and more all the time the importance of this, having not only a functional, economically sound, culturally sound foundation to a city by having these things available in a downtown, it's also very important, as Mr. Pay said, that you will have the most beautiful city in the United States. Since that time, there has been less than a 10% variation or deviation from the original Pay plan. And so the pie in the sky plan will be completed, and the goals that Mr. Pay had will become reality. On August 11th, I will be with many of you again in the Persian room where the new Mummers Theater will be dedicated. It will be the first building completed under the Pay plan for redeveloping the Central Business District. The new $2.8 million Mummers Theater will be one of the finest theaters in the nation. And as was said earlier, it certainly will be a theater enjoyed and used by citizens from all over the state. 83% of the land in 1A project has already been purchased. The years ahead will see the dreams turn into reality. The $22.9 million Marriott, now under construction, will bring national conventions to Oklahoma's capital city with 15,000 seats, 100,000 square feet, a 1,200-car underground parking garage, and the most modern, up-to-date facilities. The new convention center will stand as a giant drawing card for Oklahoma City and the entire state. The John F. Kennedy and Medical Center projects will refurbish homes or provide new quarters for many of the city's residents and will contribute to a better way of life. In the downtown area, Oklahoma City's leading citizens are making their stake in the future in the form of new buildings that will change the skyline radically. Kerr McGee, is spending $20 million, and I agree with that figure, John, on a new 30-story building. The First National Bank and Trust Company will erect two 14-story buildings. The Fidelity Bank is going 14 stories into the air with its new building. As Liberty National Bank today tops out its new building at 35 stories, the $17.4 million tower will be the tallest building in Oklahoma. I think it's very significant that the banks, the oil companies, are playing such a significant and leading role in the progress made in Oklahoma City, because the banking institutions of our state have played a very big role, along with the oil companies, in much of the progress that has been made in Oklahoma. When you package all this redevelopment together, some people undoubtedly will refer to Oklahoma City as the Dream City, because it's going to be unique going to be unique because it is going to be all new all at once, just as it was all worn out all at once. And so the planner had a free hand, Mr. Pay, in deciding just what he would do. He wasn't restricted with the normal restrictions of many buildings that would have to be built around. And so he was able to provide limits on heights and shapes of buildings and dimensions so that it would form a beautiful portrait, as he said. And I think as Oklahoma develops further, the beauty of Oklahoma City will be one of its top assets. Going back to the pie in the sky, we must realize that, and going back to the very beginnings of Oklahoma City, that this city was not built and developed because of its natural environment or the natural facilities that were available. But it was developed into the great progressive city that it is today because of the people who had a purpose and still have a purpose of developing a beautiful, growing, expanding city for the benefit of all. You have in your city many things of great importance, innovation to lots of people, such as one of the first approaches in Negro management, ownership, and employment in a company called NEOC, sponsored by Western Electric. So you have an interest in people, by people. And this is why, in my opinion, you have been able to build such a great city. Using the word good in its deepest sense as the most general word of commendation in the English language, I would say that Oklahoma City is a city of good sense, good living, good business, and good people. It came into being because of good people with good sense who wanted a good place for good living. These are its real foundations, I believe, and I think the foundations of any good city. And on these foundations will be Oklahoma's capital city, and it will continue to grow and prosper. I might add, in adding my congratulations, Bill, to you and the directors for this great occasion today. My personal thanks, the thanks of all the people in the state for the confidence that you have in Oklahoma City and the state of Oklahoma. I can assure you that it's very, very well placed. And further, I'd like to say that I think so much of Oklahoma City, I'd just like to stay here for 4 more years.
Well, thank you very much, Governor Bartlett. I really shouldn't tell this because Paul Strasbaugh is liable to throw a knife at me from back there in the middle of the room, but impulsively I will. An industrial prospect was in the Chamber's office just earlier this week for the first time, and right out in the middle of a rather serious discussion, the president of this firm says, please, please don't tell that salesman out there at the Capitol that we're in town, at least until we get a few statistics. And now to invite your participation in a special ceremony that will follow immediately and to announce the winner of the door prize who will get to ride up on the last beam. It is my pleasure to call on Mr. Bill McLean, Vice President of the Chamber and President of Liberty National Bank and Trust. Bill?
I don't know how you follow these kind of punchlines, yours and the governor's about the 4 years, but I'll try. I'll be very brief, I assure you. You know, reflecting on the wonderful things our very busy governor has taken time to say, and reflecting on the parade of awards, John, that you've displayed here, I can't resist saying that this surely is one of the better tomorrows we're enjoying today, the kind we've been saying we've been building for. I must say, marvelous experience. While I'm being a little dramatic about it, hope not too much so, I'd like to put the spotlight on Les Longcrier. Les was introduced earlier. He represents, as you know, the Henry C. Beck Company. Henry C. Beck Company does not live in Oklahoma City. It lives in Dallas, Texas. Henry C. Beck Company was identified with this building fully a year before the Liberty was. It would have been a gross injustice to have insisted on the displacement of the Henry C. Beck Company as a general contractor for the building, in our opinion. But more than that, through the work of this man right here, primarily, at our request, it is a pleasure to announce today that local subcontractors and suppliers will be the beneficiaries of the cost of this structure to the extent of 80 cents of approximately 80 cents of every dollar that will be spent on it. Unless you didn't have to do that, you did it at our request, and I think this is the place to give you the spotlight, and we're grateful to you. One other very quick thing, John. I see dozens of people in this audience who have been very generous in their comments about the change in the skyline this building has brought about. We're grateful to you for that. Naturally, we do not hide our own pride in the height of this building. But I'd just like to say the height of the building was much more than a matter of vanity. It was rather the result of a very comprehensive and professional study of what this entire city block that we were fortunate enough, Jim White, to have for a building site should have built on it. And it was the result, rather than the cause, of the dimensions of the building. We're now going to ask you to share with us in the popping out and dedication ceremonies. Seating has been provided for those who can go with us now across the street. If indeed the public has beat you to your seats, it's the reserved portion near the front, the wooden chairs, or if those who can go are more than enough to fill those seats, and you have to stand and share the ceremony with us, I promise you it'll be a very short ceremony, and by all means, please join us across the way. John, thank you. Governor, thank you.
The meeting is adjourned.